Hi.
Hello again. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 30. We're reading from the NIV.
Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so.
Well, lots of controversy, even in verse 26. There's been, from the beginning of Bible study, and this is even before the Christian era, speculation as to who's talking to whom. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And then in verse 27, so God created man in his own image. This moving back and forth between the plural and the singular has caused consternation even for Jewish interpreters. We'll put a link in about that at the end. But when you're a witness, what do you do with this?
Well, I think the way we believed as witnesses was that God was talking to Jesus at the time. Well, he wouldn't have been Jesus, he'd been Michael. So they think he was talking to Michael at the time. But there is a problem even with their interpreting it that way. Because if he's speaking to Michael, they believe Michael was an angel. Maybe the highest angel, but they still believe he was an angel. So I don't think in anywhere in Scripture are they going to be able to say that angels are made in the image of God. It never says that.
Never are.
And neither can they say that the angels were co-creators.
Yeah, that's a big one in the Old Testament.
Yeah. So they have a problem with this text, even apart from any other problems they might have with the text.
Yeah. So the New Testament, of course, gives us Christ as not co-creator, but creator. He's not credited as co-creator.
Right.
So whatever we have to do in the New Testament to make this fit, I think we can make it fit with our Orthodox doctrine of Christ. But we can't make it fit with Michael the Archangel.
Right.
And I think even ex-JWs, even though they come down in various viewpoints and decide even in favor of two gods or no God other than Yahweh, here you have the problem that there's a moving back and forth between the first person and the third person, even in the very first text on the creation of man. And we can wrestle with it, and it's not clarified for us here. So what have the commentators done with this over the generations? Well, C.F. Kyle, in the famous Kyle Delitzsch commentary, says this: "The plural we was regarded by the fathers and earlier theologians almost unanimously as indicative of the Trinity. Modern commentators, on the contrary, regarded it either as pluralis majestatis, that is, plural of majesty, like the Watchtower does, or as an address by God to himself, the subject and object being identical, or as communicative, an address to the spirits or angels who stand around the deity and constitute his council." But of course in the text they haven't been mentioned. So we're left to speculate.
Right.
Henry Alford and Kyle have further comments.
This likeness consists not in his nobler external form, for God has none, nor in his imperial rule over earth and her inhabitants, for this would only be consequence of his likeness to God, only be a consequence of his likeness to God, but in his superior spiritual nature, which he has by direct communication with God, as the parallel account, chapter 2, verse 7, gives it. The spiritual nature, when free from sin, reflected in small the spiritual nature of God himself. When sin intervened, it lost its purity and dignity, its holiness and blessedness, but not its basis and form. That was Alfred. Kyle says, man is the image of God by virtue of his spiritual nature, of the breath of God by which the being formed from the dust of the earth became a living soul.
So, of course, those are absent ideas if you're a witness. God has a spiritual nature. God is spirit, our Bible says, as spirit in the New World Translation. But man has no conscious spirit. But Christianity doesn't teach that. Neither did Judaism. Nahum Sarna, in Understanding Genesis, one of the great Jewish commentators on this book, says this about the contrast between this idea that man is created male and female in contrast to the pagan views. Here's what he says: this notion of creation by the divine will presents us with yet another radical departure from paganism. In polytheistic mythologies, creation is always expressed in terms of procreation. Apparently, paganism was unable to conceive of any primal creative force other than in terms of sex. It will be remembered that in Enuma Elish, one of the great Sumerian epics of 2000 or so BC, Apsu and Tiamat represent respectively the male and female powers, which, through the commingling of their waters, gave birth to the first generation of gods. The sex element existed before the cosmos came into being, and all the gods were themselves creatures of sex. On the other hand, the Creator in Genesis is uniquely without any female counterpart, and the very association of sex with God is utterly alien to the religion of the Bible, when, in fact, Genesis informs us that male and female he created them, that God himself created sexual differentiation. It is more likely that we are dealing with an intended protest against such pagan notions.
That is interesting. It's like when we talked about the reason that certain things are named or not named is in teaching them something different than what they would have gotten from pagan neighbors, right? The sun and the moon and being gods.
Yeah, so this is an intended protest, Sarna says, against the pagan notions of how creation is actually procreation.
Yeah.
And then we have Gaussen in The World's Birthday, talking about the point that was made by Albright in the last segment, that science has not yet caught up with the concept of the human race that we have very plainly taught right here in the first chapter of the Bible.
And he says, remark these words well, dear children. See how distinctly the scripture declares to us in the very first chapter the unity of the human race. Ancient science refused to believe that all men had sprung from one the same Father. She taught that there were nations of monsters on the earth, and she imagined that generic and fundamental differences existed in the structure of the different races of men. But she has now been obliged to confess that all the discoveries of geography, as well as those of science, testify to the historical, physiological, and moral unity of all the families of men.
And Alfred adds a point that should be obvious here, but isn't obvious to us who have the diet of the Western world. He says it appears from this that vegetable diet alone was originally assigned to man. Traditions of the same fact are found in various Gentile writers of Greece and Rome, and the ancient practice of Egypt, India, and Syria agree thereto. But I guess the point that jumps off the page here is that we have here not only a protest against the pagan view of the sexuality of the gods, but also a protest against the ancient scientific conception or mythological concept, because myth and science were intermingled in the ancient world to a great degree. That the concept that the human race is not one, but rather a group of races, some of which are inherently inferior to others. And I can't help but feel that this is so important right now, as we fan the flames of racism all over again. And it can't be a coincidence that since we've fled from the Christian faith over the last couple of generations, we have the ancient emotions and ancient concepts rising again.
Pagan notions.
The competition of races. In the Bible, there is only one race, and that is the race of Adam. We'll put in a link to Pinchas Lapid, and I mentioned at the beginning the Jewish wrestling with this text. What does it mean? Let us make man in our image. In God's image he was made. So Lapid, an Orthodox Jew, has wrestled with that, and he details the Jewish speculation about that even before Christ. And also the playlist, because we got many surprises when we came to the book of Genesis all those years ago. So the playlist tells the story of our growing appreciation of the book of Genesis. The first videos are devoted to that theme. All of the shocks we got as we took Genesis seriously for the first time.